Good morning, everyone. Mr. Chairman, dear Ahmad, dear friend Mr. Rahman, and my friend Boris Tadic, former president of Serbia, distinguished guests, all of you, I would like to introduce my speech by presenting a real thank to the Center of Governance for inviting me. I am a former Prime Minister of Mali. Mali is a country in Africa, West Africa, very far from Bangladesh. But I am very honored to be here among you and try to talk about some topics linked to this important forum. I would like to introduce my presentation at the first chapter to present what, on my opinion, could be the global geopolitical map. And at the second chapter, I will share with you some important questions linked to what is going on and what could be the next decade on the geostrategical landscape. And the last chapter, I will try to talk about the Indo-Pacific issues, even though I am not a real expert of that, but I will share with the crowd my view about this important area of our world. In the first chapter, on my view, 5 important characteristics must be known to explain the current picture of the global map, the global geopolitical map. The first one is sadly the decline of multilateralism. And this situation is shown by the difficulties in solving international problems with international agreement. The example of climate issues, security issues, economic issues, and how it is difficult internationally to find some global solution about financing the development. The other example is the impossibility to reform the United Nations system, in particular the permanent membership of the Security Council. We have some hope on this stage, like in the health with WHO, trade, WTO, and the other sectorial organization, international organization. But it is obvious that the multilateralism is declining. The second characteristic of the global map is the rising of powerful nations, dominant in their neighbor and trying to get a position elsewhere. And the 2 most dominant countries around the world are obviously the US and China. They are unifying countries around them through organization or initiatives. We can show the example of NATO, G20, and BRICS. And this confrontation is being global. And my opinion, it will go on. Underground, on the seas, on the air, even in the space. It will be political. It is also political. It is economic, cultural, security, scientific, and it will last. The third characteristic of the global map is a new one and an important one. It is the ambition of the middle power countries, which will try to take advantage of the confrontation between China and the US. These countries like India, Brazil, Japan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, South Africa, in Africa, Nigeria. And the example of this country trying to be visible is given by the both member chief of some of them in G20 and BRICS. This characteristic will be and is and will be the difference between the former match US and Soviet Union and the current match US and China. These nations will play some roles in the future, and we'll note that in our analysis. The fourth characteristic is Europe, constituted by several countries, rich, but unfortunately divided. The problem of Europe is the division, the difficulties to work together, and the evidence of this division is the declining of the Europe of defense. The Europe of defense has been totally eaten by NATO. And the last characteristic is, I don't know if you can say the declining of democracy, but democracy is being challenged in different parts of the world now. We are facing to the rising of fury and rage, radicality everywhere, and the trend of national policies inspired by the right vision of the societies. Close the borders, nationalism, focus on their own interests, have finished damaging the democracy image. And now, in several countries, democracy is not considered as the right way for development. And if we look at the African situation, we'll show some example of that. Some what we call coup d'etat, the overthrow of regular regime in some countries in Africa, and the young thinking that They believe in autocracy compared to democracy. This is a characteristic of the global map. We have to take that into account. In the second chapter, I would like to share with you some questions, analysis about what is going on in the planet. The first is the war between Russia and Ukraine, which is going on with a huge impact everywhere. And on my opinion, this war will last, unfortunately. And I think this war is not winnable by any part. Russia has not enough resources to win, and Ukraine will not get enough weapons to win. And this situation will weaken, for sure, Russia, and it will damage the cooperation overseas around the world. The second thinking I would like to share with you is about values. Because the international relationship from the Second World War to now has been established around values. But now, look at the values around the world. The first is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom to choose who may lead the collectivities. These freedoms are being contested by a lot of states, regimes around the world. The second is the right for everyone to access services, to be educated, to get health, to get job, to get revenue, income. And if this value is important, why we are struggling to get the SDGs by 2030? The third is equality, gender equality, no discrimination against minorities, protection of human rights, and then the right for international community to interfere to the internal affairs. If this value is important, what about religious consideration or sovereignty, the claiming for the country to have the right to do what they want on their own territory? The next value is the humanity, the right to live. If this value is important, what about the UN being unable to get more than 35% of its budget for humanitarian assistance? We are searching 56 billion, and now only 20 are available for humanitarian action. Finally, about the value, it is difficult to gather humanity around values, whereas it was that situation that drove the settlement of international institutions and organizations. The third topic on this chapter is about war. What kind of war during the nuclear era? Is it possible to ban definitively the use of nuclear weapons? Or is it needed to prepare ourselves, especially in the Indo-Pacific zone, to face nuclear war? And then what role for new technologies on the battlefield? And what kind of battlefield, when it is possible, to destroy infrastructures or financial system at a distance? The next one is about climate change. Disagreements about the application of Paris Agreement. Low willingness of powerful countries to fill their duties. Less hope about reaching the goal to maintain the global warming around 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial period. No action expected. The future on this way will depend on the capability for NGOs, notably in the north, to force the government to act. And finally, on this chapter, I will talk about Africa, my own continent, which represents 16% of global population, but only 3% of global GDP, 2% of global investment, and 54 states. Africa is not a country, it's a continent with 54 states. Africa, the main characteristic of our continent is, as I said for Europe, is division. We are not able to gather ourselves on the same vision, the same ambition, and try to go out from poverty. And the leading country in Africa, the leading countries in Africa, all of them are unfortunately focused on their own situation. That's why Africa is still so divided. And the Sahel region in Africa, where is my own country, Mali, is across the west and the east of the continent, impacted by climate effect, deserts, poor and demographically dynamic, migration area, and now the seat of battles, rebellions, terrorism, armies division, ethnic issues. The Sahel has no institution to manage its concerns, and it is shared between West Africa and East Africa. That does not ease to solve its problem. I talk about Sahel because Sahel look like the Indo-Pacific, on my opinion. Not totally a continent, undefined map, undetermined concept, some countries together, but a huge difference between them, and the difficulties to gather themselves around the same vision, the same ambition. This to introduce the last chapter about Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific, as said and shown, is one of the richest zones in the world, with 40 countries. The area where are concentrated a huge part of businesses, investments, trade, 2/3 of humanity, combining welfare and poverty. Very diverse situation. It is, for sure, a geostrategical opportunity for the two powerful countries, US and China, but also for countries like Japan, Indonesia, or India for sure. It is also a zone with a huge challenges. The South China Seas, climate change concern, territorial issues between countries, humanitarian problem inside some countries and some other issues. But the Indo-Pacific is not a continent and has no institution or no organization in charge of tackling its political or other difficulties, economic, environmental, and security. The question is why and how to settle an organization in charge of Indo-Pacific challenges, and then how it will be complementary with the current dispositif. On my opinion, the first answer is it will be difficult to gather the region in a political way and in a political organization due to the complexity of the reality. Maybe, like what is going on in UN system, it is possible to focus the attention on some sectorial issues like climate, health, trade, freedom of movement of people, capital, and other issues, like what the European Union started by steel and coal, and then try to enlarge the scope. For the future, the probable scenario will be the face-to-face confrontation between China and US in the Indo-Pacific, and some role played by the middle powers. In this context, countries in the region must be smart to take advantage of the regional and global balance created by this confrontation to reach their targets in terms of security, stability, and prosperity. This will be tricky, but not impossible. Dealing with powerful nations could be complex because they are able to be at the same time big as an elephant and small as an ant. Finally, and I will conclude by that, we must never forget that it is difficult, near impossible to predict what will happen in the global map now. The only certainty for the future is the uncertainty that surrounds it. Anything planned can be swept away by a single event, and we will face several events in the coming years and decades. What we need to integrate is the need for agility, adaptability, and resilience. Agility, adaptability, and resilience, which are needed for a single country, region, continent, and a zone like the Indo-Pacific. And for that, building consensus are needed around ideals, ambitions, and visions in order to gather people and to maintain the truth between people and leaders in a country, in a region, and in a continent. This is what I advise to the Indo-Pacific countries, what I advise also to my own continent, because I was saying we are so divided in our continent. And this is the substance of my speech. And I would like to thank again very warmly the Center of Governance to inviting me to make this speech. Thank you. Thank you for your hearing.